All right, so President Joseph Robinette Biden did one of the first press conferences that he has done since all the way back in, I think it was May, and this did not go well, okay? There were probably a dozen clips that I could pick out from this entire conference that are worthy of making an entire video about, but the one that I'm about to show you guys right here was pretty much the worst of the worst, because if it's actually true and he means what he says in this clip, then he's basically admitting that he is completely delusional as to the current state of politics within the United States. So stick with it, because this clip is, I don't know if they failed to shoot him up with the adrenaline before he went out to do this press conference, but we got Sleepy Joe here basically giving the most long-winded and boring answer to a question that was asked by a reporter, basically pointing out, hey man, you ran on all of these things, you have completely failed to pass them, what went wrong basically, okay? So let's just go ahead and listen to Joe Biden give his explanation for what has been stalling his main agenda items.
You'd have to acknowledge we made enormous progress. But one of the things that I think is something that, one thing I haven't been able to do so far is get my Republican friends to get in the game of making things better in this country. For example, I was reading the other day, and I wrote the quote down so I don't misquote him. A quote from Senator Sununu when he decided that he wasn't going, Governor Sununu, when he decided he wasn't going to run for the Senate in New Hampshire. Here's what he said. They were all, for the most part, content with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It was very clear that we just had to hold the line for 2 years. Okay, so I'm just going to be a roadblock for the next 2 years? That's not what I do, Sununu said. He went on to say it bothered me that they were okay with that. Then he goes on to say, I said, okay, so we're not going to get stuff done if we win the White House back, Why didn't we do anything in 2017 and 2018? And then he said, how the Republican Sununu spoke to answer the challenge? He said, crickets, yeah, crickets. They had no answer. I did not anticipate that there'd be such a stalwart effort to make sure that the most important thing was that President Biden didn't get anything done. Think about this. What are Republicans for? What are they for? Name me one thing they're for.
Okay, so that's basically it, right? You guys get the point of the argument that he's trying to put forward here, that Republicans are blocking everything that he wants to do, essentially, and they're being unfair meanie bobinis, basically. So, listen, the reason why I'm bringing you guys this clip is not because that's not true, because it is. And even the question that he was putting there at the end of that, right, where he says, what do Republicans actually stand for right now? I mean, yes, we know that they stand for tax cuts for the wealthy, they stand for endless militarism, etc., but what are they actually running their campaigns on right now? If you go and look around the country, especially in like that most recent Virginia race, basically they're running on like bullshit culture war issues, right? They're running on anti-CRT stuff, critical race theory stuff. They're running on like, anti-cancel culture stuff, etc., etc. They're running on bullshit culture war issues to basically distract from the fact that their actual substantive agenda is widely disliked amongst the American people. Now, where Joe Biden gets this completely embarrassingly wrong is saying that he did not anticipate Republican obstruction to his agenda. Now, you can go and check the logs on my channel. I was making videos before Joe Biden even took office explaining how that would be the dynamic, okay? And it's not because I'm a fortune teller, it's because I looked at history and also looked at what Republicans have been openly saying for a very long time, which Joe Biden should be aware of, given the fact that he was the vice president under Obama for nearly a goddamn decade and experienced the exact same type of endless obstruction to block anything that a Democratic president wants to do. Here's an article from literally 2010, the GOP's no compromise pledge. So let's just hear from some of their leaders at the time. Here's John Boehner, the likely speaker if Republicans take the House, offering his plans for Obama's agenda. Quote, we're going to do everything, and I mean everything we can do to kill it, stop it, slow it down, whatever we can. Okay, notice he's not saying like on any specific piece of legislation. He's just saying anything that Obama puts forward, we're going to try to block. Also, we have here Mitch McConnell summed up his plan to the National Journal. The single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. Okay, it doesn't matter what the substance substances, you cannot convince people to do good things if they're just corrupt, okay? That's a fundamental reality that Joe Biden doesn't seem to be able to understand, even though he just went through 8 years of this under Obama, okay? So for some reason, he thinks that like Mitch McConnell from 2010 is wildly different than Mitch McConnell from 2021 or 2022. It's just fucking delusional. And it's not just delusional based on history that Joe Biden himself directly experienced. It's also delusional because Mitch McConnell himself and the entirety of the Republican Party have been openly saying this the entire time that Joe Biden has been in office, okay? This is just from way back in May of 2021. McConnell says he's 100% focused on stopping Biden administration. Stopping the Biden administration. McConnell said that about the last administration, about Barack, that he was going to stop everything President Joe Biden said. So not only was McConnell saying this back under Obama, but Joe Biden also heard him say this under Joe Biden's presidential administration. And not only that, but he literally is openly saying it out loud right here. So how can you have a quote like this where you are openly acknowledging that Mitch McConnell, the leader of Senate Republicans, is coming out and saying he's not going to help you with absolutely jack shit, and then you turn around and say, oh, I wasn't anticipating that there would be such a stalwart effort to make sure that President Joe Biden didn't get anything done. Why? Why was that not what you were anticipating? Because they were openly saying it, okay? So again, just completely delusional. And this ties into something else that I wanted to make a bigger point on in this video, because one of the biggest lies that we were told in the Democratic primary in 2020 was that Bernie's too radical. He won't be able to work across the aisle as Joe Biden has been able to do. Joe Biden, on the other hand, he's this centrist, he's this moderate, and he has this long Senate career of working across the aisle in order to get big, bold legislation passed. Now, that is true. Joe Biden does have an extensive career record in the Senate of working across the aisle with Republicans to get big, bold legislation done. It just so happens that basically all of those major pieces of legislation that Joe Biden fought for were some of the worst decisions in modern American history. And that's what they never told us in the Democratic primary, right? They say, oh, look at all of these different times that he worked across the aisle with Republicans, and they don't tell you that it was on things like, I don't know, mass incarceration. So here, again, lock the SOBs up. Joe Biden in the era of mass incarceration, he now plays down his role overhauling crime laws with segregationist senators in the 80s and 90s. That portrayal today is at odds with his actions and rhetoric back then. So you want to talk about Joe Biden's success working across the aisle with Republicans? It's on shit like this, okay? It's on working with segregationists to create the problem of mass incarceration that we are still dealing with right now. You could also look at other things like the bankruptcy bill that created the student debt crisis that we have right now. How Biden helped create the student debt problem he now promises to fix. So working across the aisle with this, glorious bipartisanship that everybody likes to jack off to, but you look at what the bipartisanship actually has produced in the historical record, and it's basically always on terrible shit like this. So he created the student debt crisis that he now is also refusing to address, even in a mild and moderate way, by canceling what he promised, $10,000 worth of student debt. So again, Biden facing a lot of the problems that he himself helped to create. Again, we can look at other examples as well. Joe Biden supported the job-killing NAFTA and then flip-flopped on pro-Michigan jobs plan. So, I mean, listen, this is, tying it into Trump's actions on the USMCA, which in and of itself had tons and tons of flaws. I don't want to give credit on that, basically almost in any way, shape, or form. It was a barely, mild tweaking of NAFTA, basically. But it is true that Joe Biden did support the job-killing NAFTA that helped to export a lot of our American manufacturing jobs overseas to allow U.S. capitalists to exploit cheap labor in countries like China and the Philippines, etc. So he is part of the reason why that ended up happening, again, because of his, glorious bipartisanship that he likes to brag about all the time. Just one more example, okay? Joe Biden championed the Iraq war. Will that come back to haunt him now? Unfortunately, not enough, but yet again, Joe Biden working across the aisle as many corporate Democrats did at the time and helped to push the Iraq war, which was probably the single most catastrophic foreign policy mistake in at least modern U.S. history, okay? So again, the broader point of what I'm trying to get you guys to understand here is not only is Joe Biden either delusional or lying about the fact that he didn't know he was going to face Republican opposition, but on top of that, even in these circumstances where he successfully works across the aisle with Republicans, it almost always, and if you look at the historical record, you'll see that almost always produces horrible outcomes, okay? So not only should we not be striving for a president to be working across the aisle with Republicans, but we should be trying to go for a president that is trying to destroy everything that the Republican Party stands for. Okay, that's what we actually need. Now, we're still dealing with this ongoing narrative of how Joe Biden has shifted too far to the left, and that's why his approval rating is tanking, which is complete bullshit. It's complete nonsense. But part of the reason his approval rating is tanking is because what has he actually gotten done? His maximum approval rating was right after he sent out the stimulus checks, which was more of a left-wing proposal, okay? It started tapering off when corporate members within his own party, right-wing members within his own party, like Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, started tanking his agenda items like Build Back Better, okay? And they completely failed to pass some of the most popular left-wing pieces of legislation that were on the table. That's when his approval rating started to tank. So you should not be striving to work more with Republicans. You should be striving to enact the actual agenda that you yourself ran on, which again is not Bernie Sanders' radical left agenda. It was your own supposed moderate compromise legislative agenda that you told people you were going to be the specialist in getting things done.